There was a time in Montana's history when the icon of modern transportation was a Concord coach thundering along roads that carved their way through the mountains and dusty prairies of the Western Territory. Picturesque as it may seem, this type of travel was a rugged venture, even by the standards of the pioneers of the 1800s. As the railroads expanded through Montana, locomotives became the primary source of transportation for both passengers and cargo. Stagecoaches gradually began to disappear from the Montana landscape. In June of 2020, well over 100 years after the last stagecoach traveled across Montana, Zion Stage Line attempted a stage run from Idaho to North Dakota. The ruggedness of this journey would be less than those made 100 years ago, but modern traffic, Montana weather, and exhausting days of travel would all require some good old-fashioned grit to pull it off.
Horses have always been in my family. My grandpa raced quarter horses. My dad grew up around the track and cowboying, so naturally all 12 of us kids grew up riding and working with horses.
Coming from a big family, I guess we've had a lot of big dreams growing up, and there's a lot of dreams that you'll have and they'll fade over time, but there's one dream that seems to stick with us, and that's stagecoaches and horses, I guess.
So when I was little, I worked for a couple down the road, Kent and Mary Lou Connor, and I moved pipes for them, so when I got done in the morning, I'd go down and they're usually messing with driving horses, so they got us kids started on driving, and then they helped us put our first team together and our first 4-up team. And
the horses came easy because that's something we've always had around, but for a stagecoach, even as young kids, we knew we'd never be able to afford a real one, so our only option was to build our own, so that's what we did. The first one we built, we took a big Fertilog and cut some rounds off for the wheels, and the axles we used whatever pipes we could find laying around. But the fun only lasted about 50 yards before our axle broke and we tipped over sideways. Thankfully the team kept going because the tongue broke off, so no one got hurt. And since no one got hurt, we figured we'd try something else. Scooped up our mess of boards and got it all put back together and found us a rubber tired running gear that we mounted it on and gave it a nice touch up of paint, and you know, back then we were pretty proud of it. So we ran the rubber tires for quite a few years and had fun with that, but still it wasn't the original thing. We wanted to get the wood wheels and the actual deal, so figured maybe if we could just buy some wheels we could build on that. So we contacted a wheeler and he actually said it would be cheaper for us to get an old stagecoach they had actually used in the movie 3:10 to Yuma and burnt it out. He said it cost about the same as it would to build the wheels, so get the money, we sold the team of horses we had then and got the stagecoach and fixed it up, and then got us a new team of horses. We started using it for events, rodeos, and weddings, and mostly just having fun with it. But anyway, we wanted to do more advertising, so I guess I thought it would be a good idea to take it from Bannock State Park down to Tombstone, Arizona.
so we liked Shai's idea going from Bannock to Arizona, But we just thought that's gonna be a lot to pull off with work and all, so we figured going across Montana would be something that was actually doable.
And even though it's not across the country, that's still 600 miles you're going, so we figured we're gonna need some help.
When I originally heard about the Strain's plans to go from Idaho to North Dakota, I thought it sounded pretty crazy, but pretty soon I found out they were serious and actually gonna go through with it, so I decided to go ahead and go with them. We just didn't want to miss out on an adventure.
So we knew we were gonna need at least 12 horses. We had 4 of our own already broke the drive, so we figured best way to do it would probably be to get unbroke ones, because breaking horses is kind of what we do anyway, and then we could sell them after the trip.
So when we first started looking for horses, we were mostly looking around western Montana. We didn't have much of a budget, so that kind of limited us quite a bit, but anyway, we were hoping for bigger horses, and they had to be over 3 if we wanted them to hold up to the trip.
So I started put up a few ads, letting people know what we were doing and what we were looking for, and started sifting through ads that people had put up, just looking for horses. And we had Hannah Catalina reached out to us. She's a Liberty trainer from Whitehall, Montana. We got a number of horses through her, as well as just random horses from around the state that had all kinds of different stories from all kinds of different people.
So out of the 8 new driving horses, 7 of them ended up being BLM Mustangs. Mustangs are a pretty hardy, tough horse, so we figured they'd hold up good to the miles. Taz and Nagira were both BLM Mustangs from Hannah Catalina. They're the smallest team, but probably the most popular because of their looks. Rosie and Shine were BLM Mustangs from Hannah. They were most energetic, seemed to never have any quit in them. Bailey and Fife were both BLM Mustangs. They turned out to be one of our most laid-back teams. T and Camille we called our power wagons. They weren't very big, but they could sure pull. Tweed and Samaria were a good solid team. Whether leaders, wheelers, swing team, they did their job. Keckle and Shiloh were one of our original teams. Started quite a few years ago. They're nice to have for starting the new ones.
We didn't buy the horses all at once. We got them over the period of a month or 2. We knew when we were buying these horses that when we sold them, we wanted them to be all-around horses, and having them rideable as well was going to be important to that. So as we brought them home, we started them to ride before we started driving.
So once they're going under saddle, then we start driving them. We'll fit a harness to them, and we have a separate harness for each horse just because they're a pain to adjust. But anyway, then we'll ground pen them and ground drive them, and usually hook them to a tire, and we'll just take it as slow as they need to go to pick it up, and then we'll start putting them in a team with an experienced horse. And then it's just putting miles on them, so we ended up with 8 of them in Augusta.
Us 3 were pretty busy back in the Bitterroot, working our full-time jobs and getting stuff ready for the trip. I also started one team on the side.
That was Fife and Bailey. Bailey did pretty well. She took to the harness real good and seemed to be just coming right along. Once we hooked her up with Fife, she didn't do quite as well. She took a while to get used to it, but she turned out to be real good.
Fife, I took a liking to him right away because he's kind of a high-spirited horse, but you can definitely tell right away that he had a good heart in him. And so he's a little tough getting going at first, though, real spooky with tarps and anything of color. There was a few incidents where he drug a few of us down the field trying to get the harness up to him, but I ended up doing about 10 days of groundwork just desensitizing him. And he really came along, and in the end he actually made one of our quietest team members.
So the teams we had in Augusta, once they were all driving, we started just putting them in 4-up teams, and we started putting miles on them, getting them in shape. We live about 9 miles out of town, so by the time we take a trip into town and back, we were going about 20 miles with them.
So we always fed with the teams. We'd feed every morning and evening. Brian would drive and I'd 4K. One day Bagheera started rubbing his head on the tongue, and somehow he hooked his bridle and got it off, and they took off, and so we had about half control because we had one horse with a bridle on. So we kind of aimed him right toward the hay corral. By that time I had bounced onto the back. That wagon doesn't have any springs on it. So before we got there, we just high centered right on a rock and came to a complete stop, and I got hit by the pitchfork. Then I jumped off and I was able to get up in front of them before they went any farther. So.
The one mare, Camille, she was a really good jumping mare. We would jump her up on the wagon and play around and haul her around, and so one time we jumped her up on the wagon. We were gonna run into town, and we thought it'd be nice to have a fresh horse to drive back. And so got to the gate, and I opened the gate, and Yost went to drive him through, and he said step up, and she stepped over the seat and fell off the front of the wagon, and I don't know how she did it, but somehow she went in between the tugs of the one horse, and she managed to slip all the way through. Her hindquarters got caught before he got the team stopped and drug her just a little bit. We got her out, and she seemed fine, so we loaded her back up and finished our trip to town.
So we started working on getting a route together, at least the rough draft, and we knew we wanted to go pretty straight across the state. We kind of had the general idea of roads we wanted to hit, but we didn't really know whether we could cross certain passes with the weather.
We thought about driving it, but we didn't really know how far we'd be able to make it in a day. We wanted to do about what they would have done back in the day, but they would have been stopping about every 20 miles and getting fresh horses at a stage stop. So obviously we couldn't do that, so we had to come up with a stage stop on wheels.
We needed 2 trucks pulling stock trailers. We had to do a few modifications to the trailers and weld brackets on for hauling panels.
We had a supply truck that hauled all the extra tools, all the food we needed, and it also served as a flasher truck in the bigger towns we went through.
We had to have a feed truck that we haul our water and feed on. We got all our hay donated to us from Montana Outfitters, so that was pretty nice. We had 3 55-gallon drums of oats and pea pellets.
Well, being a mechanic and having stayed with the Strains for a couple weeks before they went on their trip, I'd had a chance to look over their vehicles and was concerned at their chances of making it back in one piece. So I ended up doing a couple of maintenance items on those. Besides working on their vehicles, I also got roped into doing some other odds and ends.
So getting pretty close when we were gonna leave, we decided we needed a few things to make the stagecoach adequate for the trip. Should probably have an extra tongue, and then the stagecoach actually had the iron tires. We figured we better put rubber on that. They make a hard rubber tiring they put instead of the metal, and we figured for a lot of pavement that'd probably be a better way to go. So we wanted to get our hydraulic brakes hooked up because when we put the hard rubber tiring on, it was wearing in too fast with our manual brake, so we were gonna be going down a lot of hills, so we did that.
So shoeing was a pretty big deal that we had to do right before we left, and most of the horses had never had shoes on before, so we had been working with their feet, but still you go to nail a shoe on, it's a different thing, so that was a pretty big job, but we got them done.
As it was coming down to the last few weeks before we were finally going to be taking the trip, we were all getting pretty excited. Besides myself and the 4 Strain boys, Zach Strain was also going to be making the journey with us.
I was pretty late in the game getting involved. I figured I'd go, never want to miss out on a good opportunity.
And Ephraim was going to be bringing his wife and daughter, who was just over a year old at the time, with him.
What do you think of the stagecoach?
I do.
Stagecoach.
My twin sister, Shanae, would also be coming for about half the trip and bringing 2 of her friends from Washington.
So from the very moment that I heard about the trip, I knew 2 things. The first was that I wanted to tag along for as long as I could. This was an opportunity that you wouldn't get every day, and I wanted to take advantage of it. And the second thing that I knew was that this was going to be an adventure with a story worth telling, and I wanted to make sure that we had the pictures and videos to be able to tell that story. So I went along for the first few days with a camera, taking pictures and videos of everything that I could so that we could tell the story later on. Leading up to the trip, I was really excited and telling a lot of my friends about it, and there was a few of them that actually wanted to come along as well.
It's pretty exciting, something that we've never heard about before, or nothing that happens these days, so
Yeah.
it is very new.
I honestly did not know what to expect, and so I kind of just went with an open mind, and that's probably a good thing.
Well, this was it. We had everything we needed, the horses, the stagecoach, all the people, and the only thing left to do now was take the trip. We were all pretty excited. The night before, our nerves were just about shot because we didn't really know what to expect the next few days and weeks, but I know none of us could wait to hear those hooves hit the pavement in the morning.